Welcome to Quiz Planet, International Space Program History Edition. Do you know your space history? How many will you get right? Let's get started and find out. Which country launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, into space in 1957? Who was the first human to journey into outer space in 1961? In which year did the United States land the first humans on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission? Which country was the first to send a woman into space, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963? What was the name of the first space station launched into orbit in 1971? Which space agency launched the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990? Who was the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962? In 2003, which country became the third nation to independently send a human into space? Which mission marked the first successful landing of a rover on Mars in 1997? What was the name of the first reusable spacecraft launched by NASA in 1981? Which country launched the first satellite dedicated to astronomy, the Copernicus satellite, in 1972? Who was the first person to perform a spacewalk in 1965? In 1975, which two space agencies conducted the first international space mission, the Apollo-Soyuz test project? Which country's space agency successfully landed the Chang'e 4 probe on the far side of the moon in 2019? What was the name of the first artificial satellite launched by the United States in 1958? Which European country launched its first satellite, Ariel 1, in collaboration with NASA in 1962? In which year did the International Space Station, ISS, become continuously inhabited? Who was the first Canadian astronaut to perform a spacewalk in 2001? Which space agency launched the first mission to orbit Mercury, the Messenger spacecraft, in 2004? What was the first interplanetary mission launched by the Indian Space Research Organisation, ISRO, in 2013? Which space agency successfully landed the Philae lander on a comet in 2014 as part of the Rosetta mission? Who was the first woman from the United States to travel into space in 1983? In 2019, which country attempted to land its Vikram lander on the moon's south pole? Which country's space agency launched the Hayabusa mission that returned samples from an asteroid in 2010? What was the name of the first space telescope launched by the Soviet Union in 1983? Which mission was the first to fly by Pluto in 2015? Who was the first person from Mexico to travel into space in 1985? In which year did SpaceX successfully land the first stage of its Falcon 9 rocket? Which space agency launched the first mission to land on the surface of a comet in 1986? What was the first spacecraft to land softly on Venus in 1970? Which country launched the first satellite entirely built in Africa in 2017? Who holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman as of 2020? Which country's space agency launched the Mars Express mission in 2003? What was the first spacecraft to fly by Neptune in 1989? In 2018, which company became the first private entity to send a car into space? Which country launched the satellite Azure Space 1 in 2013? Who was the first astronaut of Chinese descent to travel into space in 2003? Who was the first space tourist visiting the International Space Station in 2001? In which year did the European Space Agency launch its first satellite, COS-B? Which country launched the first satellite into space from the Southern Hemisphere in 2009? What was the name of the first space station operated by the United States? Which country's space agency launched the Tianwen-1 mission to Mars in 2020? Who was the first Muslim astronaut to go into space in 1985? In In 1970, which country became the fifth to launch a satellite with its own rocket? Which mission was the first to return samples from the moon since the 1970s in 2020? Who was the first British astronaut to go into space in 1991? Which space agency launched the Akatsuki spacecraft to study Venus in 2010? In which year did the Soviet Union launch the first animal into orbit, a dog named Laika? Which country's space agency successfully landed a probe on the asteroid Ryugu in 2018? Who was the first person to set foot on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission? How did you do? Did you get all 50 questions right? Let me know your score in the comments. If you are interested in taking more fun quizzes, check out our other videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more quizzes.